Yeah, so the daf which we're doing review of is daf test, but we're going to start from where we left, where we started at the beginning of the week, which is in daf ches amud beis, hakol goylin al yedei Yisroel. So the Mishnah says hakol goylin al yedei Yisroel, Yisroel goylin al yedei, and everybody. The question is who's everybody? So the Gemara says that it's coming to be marba, an eved and a kusi, that an eved and a kusi who kill, or if somebody kills an eved and a kusi, they get galus. So, and there's a brisa which supports this. It says that the eved and a kusi is loika and a goyla yidei Yisrael. Yisrael goyla v'loika yidei kusi. That a kusi can get galus through a yid by killing a yid, and get malchus through a yid, and same thing with an eved, and vice versa. So the Gemara, basically, we're going off topic. We're not talking about galus anymore. We're trying to understand the brisa. The brisa says that an eved and a kusi is loika al yidei Yisrael, and Yisrael is loika al yidei kusi. What's this loika? You get malchus through somebody else. What's the situation where you get malchus through somebody else? So the Gemara originally wants to learn that it's talking about he curses him, and somebody who curses is chayav malchus. So the Gemara says that that only works one way around, but it doesn't work. Pasuk says you only chayiv golos, you only chayiv malchus for cursing somebody if you're cursing oisa ma'isa amcha. And a kusi, according to all opinions, even according to the mandam, the kusi is geri emes. Kusim are considered yidden, but they weren't oisa ma'isa amcha. They weren't behaving the way they should, and therefore, if you curse the kusi, you'll be potter. So you can't say that loika, that Yisrael is loika lidei kusi, that the Yisrael can get malchus through a kusi when he curses a kusi, because Itaka wouldn't get malchus. So the Gemara first suggests is hayed v'huzam. He was made about a kusi, and then got huzam, and then got found to be zaymim. But says that wouldn't fit in because one of the cases over here is that an eved is loika al yidei, that the eved gets malchus through the yid, and an eved can't be give eidos. You wouldn't have a situation where the eved gives eidos and then becomes huzam. So the Gemara, finally, the maskanas of Gemara is that we're talking about a situation where you hit somebody. Usually, when you hit somebody, you chayav mammon. But in this situation where it's a hakar she'ein bo shava prutza, there's no monetary payment because it's hakar she'ein bo shava prutza. We know there's malchus in such a situation because it's a regular lab, you get malchus, and that's the chiddush. The chiddush over here is that you get malchus for hitting a eved or a kusi. And what's the chiddush? The Gemara basically says there is a mandam who says that hitting is compared to cursing, and just like cursing, you only chayav if you curse somebody who's a oisa ma'isa amcha, someone who behaves properly. So for hitting, you would also wouldn't be chayav. So you shouldn't be chayav for hitting a kusi. But this brisa goes according to the mandama who says we don't compare akal liklala. You get malchus for hitting a kusi as well. Okay, then the next Gemara discusses the next piece in the Mishnah, the final piece of the Mishnah, which talks about ger toisha, which at the beginning the Mishnah says that everyone is goyla through everyone, besides the ger toisha. A ger toisha who kills a yid, or a yid who kills a ger toisha, doesn't get galus. The Gemara understands that the only reason in the Havim, and the Gemara understands the only reason why a ger toisha shouldn't get galus is because he's a goy, he's like a goy, and that's why a yid doesn't get galus for killing a ger toisha, and that's why a ger toisha doesn't get galus for killing a yid. The question is that the seif of the Mishnah says that ger toisha who kills a ger toisha does get galus. So make up your mind: is he like a goy or not? So the Gemara says, Rav Kahana says no. That premise, this is at least one way of explaining the Gemara. It's not clear in the Gemara what's the having and what's the maskana. But what Rav Kahana says is no steer between the Reisha and the seif. The Reisha is talking about a ger toisha who kills a yid, and the seif is talking about a ger toisha who kills a ger toisha. A ger toisha who kills a yid taka doesn't get galus. His aver is too chamor for galus. The ger toisha who kills a ger toisha taka does get galus, which is an interesting thing where we find that even a goy, ger toisha ultimately is a goy. Elamai, he keeps Shava mitzvahs. Even a goy is nichlal in dinim of Ari Miklat, as we see in Psukim, which are coming soon. So some say the Takar of Kahana is coming, who says it makes a distinction between ger toisha who kills a ger toisha and ger toisha who kills a yid, isn't coming to be meyash of the steer between the Reish and the Seif and the Mishnah. But Ikad Rami Kroi, and some say that there's a steer between the Psukim. One pasuk seems to imply which sounds like Ari Mikla was given to Ger Toshav. They are included in the dinim of Ger Toshav. And the Sefer, and there's another passage which says V'hoyu lochem ha'arim Mikla, which sounds like only Yidden. So on that, Rav Kana says you're right. Sometimes it's this way, sometimes that way. Meaning, if a Ger Toshav kills a Yid, so then Taka is not included in the dinim of Ger Toshav. But if a Ger Toshav kills a fellow Ger Toshav, then Taka he's included in the dinim of Golus, and he goes to Golus, and that's what the first pasuk is saying. So we've established that Ger Toshav who kills a Ger Toshav gets Golus. Now we're going to ask a stira from a brisa which seems to imply otherwise. What's the brisa which seems to imply otherwise? The brisa which seems to imply otherwise is a brisa which compares a Ger Toshav to a regular Ovid Kichavim, a guy who's Ovid Avodah Zarah, and says in both cases if they kill the Chayav Misa. So we try to understand. He says Ger just like Ovid Kichavim. And we at this point we're understanding it to be even talking about Shogeg. It says Ger, right? Because we know that Ovid Kichavim gets Misa for Shogeg as well, because even by Shogeg, because they should have been more careful. So at least that's the Havamin. So in the Havamin we understand that Ger Ovid Kichavim Shargan Eragan is even talking about a Shogeg. And we say a Ger Dumi Dovid Kichavim. We compare Ger to Ovid Kichavim, just like an Ovid Kichavim gets Misa regardless of whether he kills someone who's a guy or whether he kills somebody who's a Yid. So we understand the same thing applies to a Ger. It doesn't make a difference whether he's killing someone who's like him, a Ger Toshav, or he's killing somebody who's not like him. In a Yid, or in all instances he gets killed. So and the Gemara understands that it's talking about Shogeg. So the Gemara Taka answers no, Loi Kasha. One's talking about Derech Yerida, one's talking about Derech Aliyah. Meaning to say, Taka, you're comparing a Ger to a guy, and he's saying just like a guy who gets killed regardless of whether he's killing somebody who's the same type of him, meaning a regular Ovid Kichavim or a Ger Toshav. So the same thing should apply to Ger Toshav as well. He says you're right, but that's only talking about a situation of when you kill Derech Aliyah. In other words, Karv Lemezit. But if it's Harga Derech Yerida, which is a regular Shogeg, then Taka Ger Toshav, there's a difference between whether he kills someone who's like him and someone who's not like him. If he kills someone who's like him, kills a fellow Ger Toshav, he gets Galus. And if he kills a Yid, then he's not going to get Galus. So on that, Rava asks a kasha. And basically, I just explained that the first teretz is Rechista, he holds the Derech Aliyah is Karv Lemezit. But Rava disagreed with that. And Rava understood that the reason why Derech Aliyah is part from Galus is because it's Karv La'oinus. In other words, there's less of a reason to be Chayiv Galus. And therefore, Rava asked the kasha, how can you say that by Derech Yerida the Ger Toshav gets Galus, and by Derech Aliyah, which is less of a chet, it's more of an oinus, he's going to get killed? That doesn't make any sense. Therefore, Rava says no. You have to explain that the brisa which says that Ger Toshav gets killed for killing, just like the guy who gets killed for killing, and there's no difference between whether he kills a Ger Toshav or anyone else, is talking about Oimim Mutter. He's killing b'mezid, but he's saying that it's mutter. He's doing an intentional act of killing, but he's saying that it's mutter. To which Abaye asks, "Oimim Mutter is honest." So Rabbi says back to him, or according to some it's the Rabbi, no, I hold ani Oimim Mutter Karv B'mezid. I hold that Oimim Mutter is Taka Karv B'mezid. So what we have over here is a machlekes between Rav Chisda and either Rabbi or Rava, whether it's a two-way machlekes. Rav Chisda holds that Derech Aliyah is Karv B'mezid, but Oimim Mutter is Karv La'oinus. And that's why he explains the brayta that we talking about Derech Aliyah. And Rava holds the other way around. Derech Aliyah is Karv La'oinus, therefore we can't say that the Ger Toshav is killed in the case of Derech Aliyah. Rather, the Ger Toshav is being killed in the case of Oimim Mutter, which is Karv Lemezid. And so now we say V'ozl Tamayim, meaning we find that Rava and Rav Chisda argue about the similar situation where Kesavu Behem of an Imsa Adam, Knani V'nimsa Ger, someone thought he was killing an animal which is Mutter, and it ends up being a person. A Ger Toshav. Talking about Ger Toshav over there. Ger Toshav kills somebody thinking he's a behemoth, thinking that what he's killing is a behemoth, and really it's a human being. Or alternatively, he thinks he's killing a Knani, which would be Pater, and it ends up being a Ger Toshav. So Rav Taka says Chayav. And the reason, because Oimim Mutter Karv Lemezid, Rav Chisda says Pater Oimim Mutter Anasu. Now this is also, although it's not a case of Oimim Mutter, literally, it's a similar situation where he should have checked. Do we consider him culpable for having to check, and he didn't check or not? So Rava says yes, and the Chisda says no, and this is similar to the Oimim Mutter case. Here we have a few rayas from the Psukim which talk about Avimelech when he killed, when Avimelech took Sarah to the to his palace. So the pasuk over there says that Kadosh Baruch Hu said to Avimelech, "Hincha meis al isha shelokachta," that you chayiv misa for the isha shelokachta, and Gemara understands it to mean bidei adam. Is a raya that even though Omer Mutter, he didn't know it was an Eishes Ish, right? So maybe he should have checked, but he thought it was Mutter. And nevertheless, we're saying it's Chayiv Misa is a raya to Rob's Shitta that Omer Mutter is Mezid, and it's considered, and you mamish get Nerag for it. So Gemara says no. When the Kadosh Baruch Hu said Hincha Meiz, Chayiv Misa, he didn't mean bidei Adam, he meant bidei Shamayim. So the Gemara Taka now goes the other way and says Taka is actually diuk from the lashon of the pasuk that is only bidei Shamayim, because of the pasuk mechatoili that Kadosh Baruch Hu said you sin towards me, l'chora, which sounds like it's a bidei Shamayim issue. You sinned against me, I'm going to take care of it, but not bidei Adam. So the Gemara says that there's no raya from mechatoili, because there's other times in the psukim where it's clear we talk about the sin being towards the Eibishter. Nevertheless, the din is masala Adam. By Yosef and Potiphar's wife, it says v'chatasi lelekim, and he knew she was an Eishes Ish. If he would have been mezana with her, he would have been chayiv misa b'dei Adam. Nevertheless, the pasuk says v'chatasi lelekim. So we see clearly that just because the pasuk says that the chet is misyaches to the Eibishter doesn't come to exclude the fact that the din is masala Adam, is chayiv misa b'dei Adam, and therefore there's no raya one way or the other, because it could be that it's talking about bidei Shamayim hincha meis, in which case it's fits in with Rav Chisda, or it could also be bidei Adam, and there's no raya from Chatoili that Chatoili tells me that it's misa bidei Shamayim. Then Abaya asks Akasha to Rabbi the other way around, that l'chura from this story we can have a raya that Omer Mutter is taka karev la'oinas, Omer Mutter is exempt, it's not chayiv misa. What's the raya? Because Avimelech said to Hakadosh Baruch Hu, "Goy gam tzadik hayir, you're going to kill someone who's innocent." I didn't know. And it's mashma that the Eibishter was masking. Doesn't seem like the Eibishter responded by saying, "No, you're amazing." So the Gemara Taka says no, that there's no raya from that, because Taka, he did answer. He answered, and he had to return Avram's wife because he's a Navi. And the whole word Navi who doesn't make any sense. So what's Taka Pshat? Pshat is that really he's saying like this: return the person's wife, because now you know it's his wife, you have to return his wife. Kinavi, who was a response to that which Avimelech said, I was innocent, I didn't know, I thought it was his sister. So to that Kadosh Baruch Hu is saying, just a second, you know why Avram Avinu told you he's a sister? He's a Navi, he's a Chacham, he knew what was going on over. He could tell. You asked him a strange question. You asked him, is this your wife? Is this your sister? Is that a normal thing to do when a guest comes to the city? You ask him if he has a place to stay. You don't know. So he knew from your question that he has to respond in such a way. And because you Avimelech were taka culpable, but you shouldn't have asked this question, and you're culpable because from here we see that Ben Noach is culpable even in the case of Omer Mutter, like the case of Avimelech. Even though he said Hagoygam Taroi, he claimed he was innocent. They said, no, you're not innocent, because you shouldn't have asked these questions. You shouldn't have, and then caused Avram to say it's your sister. You should have learned Derech Eretz that when a guest comes to the city, you ask him about Chilush Sia. You don't ask him about whether this is your wife or not. Okay, so that finishes the first Amud and what we learned on Monday together. And now we'll go over second Amud, which discusses, the Mishnah discusses the Summa and the Soine. With regards to Summa, there's two shittas in the Mishnah. One is Rabbi Yehuda's shitta that yes, a blind person doesn't get galus. Rabbi says a blind person does get galus. And then with regards to soina, we have three different opinions. Tanakama holds that soina never gets galus. Someone who's an enemy never gets galus. Pashtus, because it's exeris hakosov, soina doesn't get galus. Rabbi Yossi says, I agree, a soina doesn't get galus, but you know what? He even gets misa. He's even chayiv misa if it could be explained that what he did is b'mezid. And Rabbi Shimon says it depends. Never, in other words, Reb Shimon says he never gets misa, but even galus sometimes they'll get galus. When will he get galus? So if it's clear that it was a shoygeg, you'll get galus. If there's any way of explaining that it was perhaps amazing, then he doesn't get galus because we suspect that Taki is amazing because he's a soiner. In other words, a regular person, or you have a friend who kills somebody, he's not a soiner, he's not an enemy. So then Kol's man, he looks like a shoygeg, we treat him like a shoygeg. It's possible that he could have orchestrated. There's no reason to believe such a thing. Why would he do such a thing? But if Soinen, since there's a possibility they would have orchestrated and made something intentional look unintentional, so then he doesn't get galus. And the only time he gets galus is where it's clear that he couldn't have possibly orchestrated. There's no way of saying that the das hara. So first of all, the Gemara, moving on to the Gemara discusses Summa first of all and explains the shittas of Rabbi Yehuda in Summa, and says that the first shitta, Rabbi Yehuda says the Summa is ain't goy, Rabbi says the Summa is goy. Rabbi Meir says the Summa is ain't goy is from the words in the pasuk below ra'os. The pasuk says that he kills somebody without seeing. So without seeing implies that he could have seen, and in this instance he didn't end up seeing. So that excludes a summa who never sees. That's the shit of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi says that a summa is yagoila, because he holds that the words below right actually is marbe the summa. How is the word below right marbe the summa? He says because it says twice. It says two miotim. It says below right, which would include the summa. And then it says another passage which would also include exclude the summa. Then it says another passage which should exclude the summa bivli das, without knowledge, which implies that you didn't know what was going on, and that would exclude the summa who never knows what's going on. Not just in this case. So the fact that the Torah says twice, so we have a cloud when the Torah excludes something twice, it's really coming to be marbe. And therefore, in this situation, because if it wanted to be mamait, it would just say once below rois. That would be mamait the summa without seeing the fact that it says bivli das. It's coming to tell you that no, summa is taka included. Gemara finally says, what about Rabbi Yehuda? Why doesn't he say there's two miotim over here? Why does he marbe the summa? Because the last pasuk bivli das, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is taka coming to exclude something else. Legami miskaven, which means, as the Gemara explained in the beginning of Eila Heina Goylen, miskaven larg is a behema, v'harag es ha'adam. In other words, he intended to kill, just not a person, or not a person that he's chayav for. There's a limud that you only goyla when imamish have no intention to kill whatsoever. If you have intention to kill an animal, to kill a goy, you end up killing a yid. In such a situation, you're not chayav golos, and that's what bivli das means according to Rabbi Yehuda. And fizeh below ro'is is left just for summa, and that's the explanation of Rabbi Yehuda Ramea, why Rabbi Yehuda says summa is parted from golos, and why Ramea says summa is chayav and golos. Now we move on to the topic of soine. So first of all, we deal with the Rabbi Yossi's shitta. Rabbi Yossi says that soine can actually get killed. Tolzman, I guess you can explain that it looks like a mazid. The shaila is, okay, even if you can establish and you can assume that it's a mazid because he's a soine, there's no hasra. There's a din, you have to have hasra. So the Gemara answers that you're right, meaning to say, according to most other shittas, you attack a need hasra, because there's a xeris hakasav that there has to be hasra. But our mission goes according to Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, who holds that you don't always need hasra. What's pshat? Who says chaver ain't a tzarich hasra? Someone's talmid chacham doesn't need hasra. What's pshat? He holds that the whole reason of hasra, the whole purpose of hasra, is only to differentiate between a shoygig and a mazid, meaning between somebody who thinks it's mutter and someone who knows it's asa. So the way we ascertain that he knows it's asa is by warning him. You know this is asa. You're not allowed to do it. And if you do it, you're going to get punished. But it's a talmid chacham who knows the din. He knows the din. He knows everything. So then there's no need to do hasra. So we say like this: that taka. The Mishnah which says that soin in Ereg, Rabbi Yossi is Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, not the regular Rabbi Yossi. It's Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, who we know already. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda holds that chaver ain't a tzarich hasra. And Taki would have to explain that the Mishnah is talking about chaver. He's a soiner, but he's also a chaver. He's an enemy of the person, but he's also talmid chacham, and therefore no hasra is necessary according to the shit of Rabbi Yossi, which is Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, because in his opinion, hasra is only there to make sure that he doesn't think it's mutter, and in this situation, for sure, he doesn't think it's mutter because he's a talmid chacham. Reb Shimon makes a differentiation between one type of that sometimes the sign is goyla, sometimes not, and he gives a klal. So now the Bryce elaborates on examples, right? The klal was that if we know for sure that it's b'shoigeg, then he gets golos. But if there's any possibility where we could tie choice that perhaps he orchestrated it and he made an intentional act to look unintentional, so then Hitaka doesn't get golos because perhaps it's amazing. So the Bryce elaborates and gives an example. It says for the case where you kind of it gives an example of a rope, you're pulling up a jug. So if the rope, the whole thing fell out of your hand, so then you don't get golos because it's possible that you nishmat. It's called eina goyla. But if nifsak, if the rope snaps in half, so that you couldn't possibly have orchestrated to happen just at this time when your enemy is standing underneath. So therefore you get golos. So that's a simple explanation of why a sign is how examples of when the sign is gets golos and doesn't. Now the Gemara says that you give me examples of where the whole chavel fell out of the hand, or part of the chavel, or the chavel snapped. It's very difficult to say that we've got a steer. If Shimon says somewhere else, the only time you get golos is when the whole thing falls out of your hand. Talking about magela, roller, and the whole thing falls out of your hand. Only then you get golos. So we've got a steer over here. It's a twofold steer. Why? Because in the first brisa, the brisa says that the case of nifsak is goyla, and the second brisa says nifsak ain't a goyla. Another stira is in the first brayse we say nishmat is eina goyla, and the second brayse we say nishmat is goyla. It's just a stira. So the Gemara answers, and just take note that it's the way Rashi explains, and many other Rishonim, you have to change around the gersa. It's not the way it's read in the Mishnah. It's not nifsak like kasha abayv, it's nishmat and nishmat. The Gemara basically says that the first stira between nishmat and nishmat, that in the first price it says that if it if it totally falls out of your hand, you don't get galus because it's possible for him to orchestrate it. And the second price says you do get galus. That's not kasha, because the first price is talking about soine, where he could have orchestrated. The second price is talking about you have a regular person where there's no reason to believe that it's orchestrated. So take on it's a shogeg. That's not a steer. What about the second steer, which sounds like a stronger kasha? Nifsak nifsak. Says that's not a kasha either. Ha Rabbi ha Rabban. Basically, we have the machlokes earlier whether we apply galus to the case of a situation where the whole thing falls out of your hand or not, right? And Rabbi said that you only goyla, where you're cutting wood and the wood flies out. In other words, the whole thing falls out of your hand. But if you're still holding the item, and then part of it slips out, the example over there given is an axe, and in the sharp part, the handle gets disconnected from the blade. So in such a situation, Rabbi says you don't get galus, and the Chacham say you do get galus. So that's how we miyasher the steer over here. The case where the chevel is falling, snapping, is a case where Rabbi would say Eina Goyla. Anyway, so that's and the first price, which says that Nifsak Achavel is Yagoyla, which is mashma that by Soine that's the case, but even by Oye, that's the Chacham. That's how we answer the second steer. So finally, we go on to the final Mishnah over here, that last Mishnah we're learning today, which talks about where you go to Galus. It says there's 3 cities in Evayad and 3 cities in Eretz Yisrael, and in fact, the 3 in Eretz Yisrael would depend. The 3 in Chutz La'aretz were dependent on the 3 in Eretz Yisrael, meaning that although the 3 in Eretz Yisrael were only set aside much later, like 14 years later after they settled in the Eretz Yisrael, so and the ones the Eva Yarden, Moshe Rabbeinu, even before they before they crossed the Eva Yarden, he set them apart as Ari Miklat. Nevertheless, they didn't serve as Ari Miklat until the other 3 in Eretz Yisrael served as Ari Miklat after the 14 years of settling the land. That's din number 1 in the Mishnah. Din number 2 in the Mishnah is that we would prepare roads to go to make it easy for directions, make clear roads and signs, so that the Harig B'Shoig, the person who kills B'Shoig, could find the Ari Miklat. Then number 3 is that we give that when he goes to the Ari Miklat, we give him 2 Talmidei Chachamim, so that the 2 Talmidei Chachamim can convince or persuade the Goel Adam not to kill. And finally, the 4th thing the Mishnah says, where Rameh argues, it says that you don't, because he can talk for himself. And the 4th thing in the Mishnah is Rabbi Yisroel says you should know that the people who go to Ari Miklat, it's not just a Shogi who goes to Ari Miklat. Even a Mezid goes to Ari Miklat. Bezdin would then take everyone who kills out of the Ari Miklat and decide whether they deserve to be killed, like a Mezid with Asra, or not. And even that, if not, whether they're Chayiv Golos or not, depending whether it's Shogeg or not. And if he's Shogeg, then we go back to Golos. And if he's not Shogeg, then he would go home and not go to Golos. So that's the Mishnah. And the Brisa just elaborates a little bit, saying that the 3 cities in Eretz Yisrael and the 3 cities in Chutz La'aretz were actually, aligned with each other. They were aligned with each other, meaning that they were on the same line from north to south. You could draw a straight line from from west to east. In other words, the cities in Chutz La'aretz were to the east of the cities of Eretz Yisrael, but they were mechuvanis, they were aligned. To draw a straight line from one to the other, and explains the 3 cities, what they were. Betzer and Chevron was corresponding to Betzer. Shechem was corresponding to Ramois, and Kaddish was corresponding to Goylan. And that's the first thing the Brisa says. And then the Brisa continues, says that from the words of Shilashta we learn that they were equally distanced. Meaning the 3 cities in Eretz Yisrael, not the Chutz La'aretz. But the 3 cities in Eretz Yisrael were equally distanced, meaning that the Eretz Yisrael was divided into 4, and the 3 cities were at equal distance from each other, meaning from the northern border to the first city was the same distance from the first to the second. From the second to the third was the same distance as from the third to the border, the southern border. Gemara will discuss later why it sounds even, but it's really uneven, because if you're living close to the border, you'd have further to walk, further to run to the Ari Miklat. That will be discussed in Daf Yud Amud Aleph. For the moment, we'll stop over here, and we'll finish here Shkoyach everybody for listening, and have a good evening or good day whenever you watch this.